Have you ever gotten that feeling that the official story just doesn't quite add up? That there might be something else going on behind the curtain of history? Well, today we are diving deep into a theory from our source material that says you're right. It's all about a hidden system of narrative control it calls the 10th power. And honestly, it might just change the way you look at, well, everything. So what in the world is the 10th power? According to our source, you shouldn't picture a bunch of shadowy figures in a dark room. It's bigger than that. Think of it more like an invisible operating system for our reality. And its main job? To create and maintain the official story, the one we all know, and to bury any inconvenient truths that might challenge it. And this is the real kind of mind-bending idea from our source material. The history we're taught in school, the news we watch every day, the theory says it's not just a random collection of events and facts. No, it argues that history itself is a deliberate creation, a story that has been carefully, meticulously engineered to keep a certain power structure in place. Okay, so if this system really exists, how does it actually work? Let's break down the mechanics, the framework, for how this narrative control is supposedly maintained, according to our source. Right at the heart of this entire theory is this constant battle, this tug of war between two completely different versions of reality. On one side, you've got what the source calls the official lie. That's the mainstream story, the one we all learn. But on the other side, there's the 10th power truth, a hidden, suppressed reality that tells a totally different story. So to really see how this theory plays out, our source says we have to go back to the beginning. It wants us to re-examine what it calls the 1789 lie, a foundational story that shapes so much of how we see the world. I mean, you definitely remember this from school, right? It's that classic story. The first people in the Americas walked across the Bering Ice Bridge from Siberia and, voila, they found a completely empty continent, making them the original and only inhabitants. Simple and clean. But here's where our source material wants us to hit the pause button. It asks a pretty critical question. What if that story is a little too simple? What evidence might have been pushed aside or just plain suppressed to make that clean narrative the only one we ever hear? And here's where those two narratives just completely split apart. The source claims there's tons of evidence for multiple migrations by sea, not just land. We're talking proven contact from Vikings around 1000 CE, Polynesians a couple hundred years later, all deliberately downplayed. And the alleged reason for this? To make the Americas seem totally isolated until 1492, which, in turn, makes Columbus's arrival feel like this singular, world-shattering event. When you reframe history that way, the whole picture of Columbus changes, doesn't it? According to this theory, he wasn't some visionary explorer. He was an agent of conquest. His arrival wasn't about discovery. It was about kicking off something called the doctrine of discovery. Basically, a legal framework that gave Christian nations the right to claim any non-Christian lands and systematize exploitation on a massive scale. Okay, so that's the historical foundation, but how does this connect to today? Let's jump forward and see how our source claims these ideas evolved into what it calls the 1945 system of modern control. Right, so according to this source, this system didn't just fade away with history. It allegedly uses some very modern and interlocking tools to manage how we all think. Things like political deflection, to make sure we're always looking in the wrong direction, psychological conditioning, woven right into our culture, and even something it calls frequential control. Yeah, we'll definitely get into what that means. Now for an example of political deflection, the source presents a pretty shocking one, the Charles Manson case. The official story is he was a charismatic cult leader. But this theory posits something else entirely, that Manson was an intelligence asset and that his horrific crimes were intentionally used to paint the entire 1960s counterculture as dangerous and evil, which then justified a massive law and order political crackdown. And this idea of control isn't just about huge political events. The source argues it seeps into everything, even our entertainment. It cites the video game Five Nights at Freddy's as a form of psychological conditioning. The argument goes that it subtly teaches kids to associate a place of joy, like an arcade, with terror and danger, and to distrust technology like animatronics. It's about creating a baseline of anxiety. And then there's that frequential control. The theory even gets into the electromagnetic spectrum. You know that jarring, awful sound of the emergency alert system? It suggests that's more than just a test. It's an auditory signal of the state's absolute power to take over all media at any time. And this is contrasted with the suppressed science of Nikola Tesla, whose vision of free wireless energy for everyone was allegedly squashed and co-opted for control, not for liberation. So, if all these hidden messages are floating around us, how in the world are we supposed to see them? Well, let's explore how our source claims that popular movies can actually be used as a kind of user manual, a decoder ring for major historical events. The source points to the cult classic movie They Live as a perfect allegory. You know, the sunglasses that let the heroes see the hidden messages everywhere? Well, this theory says those glasses are like a key for looking past the official story of the moon landing. In this view, the mainstream narrative we got from NASA acts just like the film's hidden command: obey, or in this case, trust the system. And it does the same thing with the movie Contact. It argues that the real discoveries from the space race weren't just about planting a flag. The source suggests the true breakthroughs were radical technologies, maybe something like free energy. But because these huge transformative discoveries couldn't easily be proven to the public, they were just classified and dismissed as meaningless background static. All right, so after laying all of this out, all this evidence of hidden narratives and secret control, what's the solution? What does the source say is the actual method for finding the truth? How do we, pierce the veil? The source actually offers a really simple but powerful method. It says if you want to break out of this narrative bubble, you have to get an outside perspective. The claim is that foreign news outlets will often highlight the very stories and angles that your own country's media system is designed to ignore or downplay. It's about changing your vantage point. Part of this whole method is just learning to spot the patterns. It's about seeing which historical figures and which ideas get promoted and which ones get suppressed. So the source contrasts heavily promoted figures like Edison and Einstein, who represent centralized power and complex systems, with suppressed figures like Tesla or the philosopher Neville Goddard, who represent radical ideas like free energy and the untapped power of human consciousness. The theory argues these ideas are dangerous to a system built on scarcity and control. Ultimately, the source material doesn't pretend to have all the answers. It's not a rule book. Instead, it leaves us with a challenge. It gives us a framework, a new lens for decoding our reality, and then it just asks this one last provocative question. If you actually start looking at the world this way, what happens next? What do you find?